The morning began like any other, but there was a quiet tension in the air that no one could name. Emily Carter stood by the kitchen window of their Boston townhouse, watching the city wake up under a pale winter sky, unaware that this ordinary day was about to change her life. Snow from the night before melted along the sidewalks, cars passed steadily, and everything outside looked calm, almost reassuring. Inside, however, something felt slightly off. Daniel, her husband of 12 years, sat at the dining table with his coffee untouched, staring at nothing in particular. He wasn't sad, angry, or cold, just distant in a way Emily hadn't noticed before, or perhaps hadn't allowed herself to notice. Their mornings had become quiet over the years, filled with routine instead of conversation, and Emily had learned to accept that silence as peace. She told herself this was what long marriages looked like: steady, predictable, safe. She moved around the kitchen, making breakfast, listening to the soft sounds of plates and the hum of the heater, trying to ignore the small knot forming in her chest. When she asked Daniel if he was leaving early, his answer was simple, but the tone lingered longer than his words. He said there was something he needed to do. Emily smiled and nodded, not asking questions, because asking felt risky, like pulling on a loose thread. As Daniel left, she watched him from the doorway, noticing how he paused before closing the door, as if he was carrying a thought too heavy to take with him. Once he was gone, the house felt larger and quieter. Emily sat alone at the table, staring at the empty chair across from her, memories slowly filling the space. She thought about the early years of their marriage, when mornings were full of laughter and careless plans, when Daniel would kiss her forehead before leaving and promise to be home early just to see her smile. Somewhere along the way, those small gestures faded, not because love disappeared, but because life became louder: careers, responsibilities, expectations. Emily had built a careful balance around that change, convincing herself that love didn't need excitement to survive. Yet that morning, the balance felt fragile. She went about her day, answering emails, attending meetings, smiling at coworkers, but Daniel's quiet presence stayed with her, like a shadow she couldn't step away from. Every hour felt heavier, every thought more restless. She tried to distract herself by remembering the good things: the stability, the shared history, the comfort of knowing someone so deeply, but even those thoughts carried a strange ache. By afternoon, the sky had darkened, and Emily found herself checking the time more often than usual. When evening came, she prepared dinner out of habit, setting 2 plates even though she wasn't sure when Daniel would return. As the clock ticked past his usual time, the silence in the house grew louder, pressing against her thoughts. She realized then that part of her already knew something was coming, even if she couldn't explain what it was. When she finally heard the door open later that night, the sound felt different, not rushed, not tired, but careful. Daniel stood in the hallway, coat still on, his expression calm but serious. Emily felt her heart skip, not from fear, but from instinct. This was the moment she would remember years from now, the moment when an ordinary day quietly split her life into before and after, though she didn't yet know why. Part 1 ends there, in that suspended second, with Emily standing in the hallway, sensing that whatever Daniel was about to say would change everything she thought she knew about love, marriage, and the life they had built together. Daniel did not remove his coat right away, and that small detail made Emily's heart beat faster, because it told her this conversation mattered more than comfort. They sat in the living room facing each other, the soft light from the lamp casting long shadows on the walls, and for a few seconds neither of them spoke. The silence was not angry, but heavy, filled with thoughts that had waited too long. Daniel finally broke it by saying he had spent the day thinking about their life, about the years they had shared, and about the quiet distance that had slowly grown between them without either of them stopping it. Emily listened closely, every word landing deep, her mind racing but her body frozen. He told her that he loved her, but love alone was not enough if it stayed asleep, and he admitted that he had been going through the motions for too long, mistaking comfort for connection. Emily felt tears rise, not because she disagreed, but because his honesty reflected feelings she had never dared to say out loud. Daniel explained that earlier that day, after a long walk through the city, he had made a decision to stop pretending everything was fine just because it was familiar. He said he did not want a life where they slowly faded into roommates, sharing space but not dreams, sharing history but not hope. Emily asked him if he was unhappy, her voice barely steady, and he answered carefully, saying unhappiness was not the right word, but emptiness was closer. He said he missed the version of them that laughed freely, that talked for hours, that looked at each other with curiosity instead of assumption. Emily felt a sharp mix of fear and relief, because hearing the truth hurt, but hiding from it hurt more. Daniel then said the words she would never forget. He had decided they needed to choose each other again, not out of habit, but with intention, and if they could not do that honestly, then they had to be brave enough to face what that meant. The room felt smaller as Emily processed his meaning, realizing he was not asking to leave, but also not promising to stay the same. She felt exposed, as if the safe structure of their marriage had been gently but firmly shaken. Emily told him she had noticed the distance too, but had been afraid to name it, afraid that speaking it aloud would break something that still felt precious. Daniel reached for her hand, not tightly, but with care, and told her that silence had already been breaking them, just slowly and quietly. He said the decision he made was to stop living in that silence, no matter how uncomfortable the truth became. Emily cried then, not from loss, but from release, because someone had finally said what her heart had been whispering for years. As they talked late into the night, emotions rose and settled like waves, sadness for what they had lost, gratitude for what they still had, and uncertainty about what came next. By the time they stopped speaking, nothing had been solved, but something important had changed. The unspoken wall between them had cracked, and through that crack, honesty began to enter. Part 2 ends with Emily realizing that Daniel's decision was not about ending their marriage, but about refusing to let it fade quietly, and that realization left her standing at the edge of a future she had never imagined but could no longer ignore. Sleep avoided Emily that night as thoughts moved through her mind without rest, each one pushing her closer to truths she had ignored for years. She lay beside Daniel, aware of his quiet breathing, feeling both close to him and far away at the same time, and she understood that the space between them was not physical but emotional, built slowly through years of choosing ease over honesty. Memories came quickly, how they met in Toronto, how their early love felt alive and full of promise, how they once talked about the future with excitement instead of careful words. As morning arrived, Emily felt a calm clarity replace her fear, and she realized she could not return to silence. She suggested a walk by the Charles River, needing open air to match the openness growing inside her. They walked side by side, not holding hands at first, the cold wind sharp but refreshing, as if the world itself was encouraging truth. Emily spoke without planning, admitting she had been afraid to want more, afraid that asking for deeper connection would seem ungrateful, and afraid that change might lead to loss. Daniel listened fully, not defending himself, not interrupting, just present, which made her feel seen in a way she hadn't felt in a long time. She told him she still loved him, but she did not want a love that felt quiet and careful all the time, and saying those words felt both painful and freeing. Daniel stopped walking and faced her, telling her that love was not meant to stay frozen, and that growing apart was not a failure but ignoring it was. He admitted he had also been scared, choosing routine because it felt safe, even when it left him feeling empty. Standing there, with the river moving steadily beside them, they felt like two people meeting again after years of absence. They talked about missed moments, unspoken needs, and small resentments that had never been voiced but had quietly shaped their distance. The conversation was honest but not cruel, emotional but not chaotic, and with every word, something heavy lifted between them. Emily realized that this moment was not about fixing everything at once, but about finally understanding each other again. As they turned back toward home, she felt uncertain but hopeful, aware that honesty had changed the ground beneath their feet. Part 3 ends with Emily knowing that love alone was not enough without effort, and that whatever came next would require courage from them both, because once the truth was spoken, there was no returning to the safety of silence. The days that followed were not dramatic, but they were honest, and that honesty changed everything faster than Emily expected. Daniel did not make promises he could not keep, and Emily did not hide her feelings to keep peace. Instead, they chose action in small, steady ways that rebuilt trust moment by moment. They started spending real time together again, not just sharing space, but sharing thoughts, memories, and quiet hopes they had once buried. Mornings became warmer, filled with simple talks instead of silence, and evenings were no longer rushed or distracted. They went out for walks, sat in coffee shops, and talked about things beyond work and routine, about dreams they had postponed, about fears they had never said out loud, and about the people they still wanted to become. Some conversations were uncomfortable, but they did not turn away, because both of them now understood that avoiding discomfort had almost cost them everything. Emily noticed changes in Daniel that felt genuine, not forced. He listened more, laughed more freely, and looked at her with curiosity instead of assumption. Daniel noticed changes in Emily too. She spoke with confidence, expressed her needs without guilt, and allowed herself to be seen fully. There were moments of doubt, moments when old habits tried to return, but they stopped and faced those moments instead of ignoring them. One evening, as they sat together watching the city lights glow through their window, Emily realized something important. The decision Daniel had made that day was not about choosing a different life, but about choosing this one with intention. He had chosen honesty over comfort, connection over routine, and courage over fear. Emily leaned against him, feeling a sense of closeness she had not felt in years, not because everything was perfect, but because everything was real. She understood then that love does not fade because time passes, but because people stop paying attention, and that love can grow again when attention returns. Daniel quietly told her that he was glad he spoke that day, even though he had been terrified, because silence would have been easier but far more damaging. Emily agreed, knowing that if he had not made that unexpected decision, they would have continued drifting apart without realizing it. As weeks turned into months, their bond grew stronger, not louder, built on respect and shared effort rather than habit. They did not try to return to who they were years ago. Instead, they created something new, shaped by honesty and choice. Emily learned that unexpected decisions are not always about endings. Sometimes they are about awakening, about seeing clearly and choosing again. The day Daniel made a decision she never expected became the day their marriage truly began again, not as a story of loss, but as a quiet, powerful reminder that love survives when people are brave enough to face the truth together.